Every single day a new case arises. Whether these are murders, abductions, or unknown identities of bodies, many cases go unsolved. By bringing these cases back to light, maybe someone somewhere could have the missing piece to the puzzle. We bring to you Unsolved Sundays with DeetS on the streets.
Christmas Day Special. 3 cases from the United States, Canada, and New Zealand. The case of Leela Anderson from Vancouver, Canada. Lila Anderson, 38, was murdered on December 25, 1959, her naked body dumped in a ravine at Knight Street and 45th Avenue. 2 little boys were out walking their dog the next day, and they found her naked body with a black skirt wrapped around her head. She had been abducted from a bus stop, dragged into a car, beaten with a tire iron, and her head was then smashed against a rock. Leela's body was found about a kilometer from the Paul's house. The couple and their young daughter were murdered 18 months earlier. The Paul's family lived in this house on East 53rd Avenue in 1958. Leela came from small-town Rock Creek, BC, and during the war served with the Royal Canadian Air Force as a sergeant cook. She moved to Vancouver after her discharge, and first worked as an assistant night manager at the White Lunch and later as a cashier at the Safeway store at Broadway and Main Street. In 1950, she bought a property at 30 East 15th Avenue and drew up blueprints for a boarding house. She hired a construction crew and supervised the work. When it was finished, she moved into the bottom suite and rented out the upstairs. Leela made it clear that her private life was her own business, and she expected her neighbors and friends to respect that. What they did know was that she loved to garden. She loved Mickey, her 8-year-old cat, and she was happy to stay at home and listen to the radio or watch television. Relatives and friends painted a picture of a quiet woman who liked her own company and preferred to live alone. She laughed at funny things, they said, was friendly to small children, and had a nice smile. Leela told her sister and a neighbor that she had made plans for Christmas dinner, but she didn't say who with. No one saw her after she left home on Christmas Day. An autopsy determined that Leela had eaten about an hour before she was murdered. It is a dreadful commentary on a type of city as ours that such a crime could occur, Vancouver Police Chief George Archer told the media. Someone must have seen her traveling about the city, or at her Christmas dinner, yet not one single witness had come forward to help with the investigation. Leela had 2 children, both of whom she adopted out. Ross Dewar was born in 1947 and believes he has an older half-sister in Ontario. Ross recently connected with a half-brother from his father's side after adding his DNA to the Ancestry.com genealogy databank. If you have any information about Leela Anderson's murder, please contact Vancouver Police at 604-717-3321 or Crime Stoppers at 1-800-228-477. Christmas Eve shooting from Schertz, Texas. Schertz police are urging anyone with clues into the murder of a Schertz businessman in the winter of 2015 to come forward. Christmas Eve 2015, Henry Gutierrez was sitting inside his living room when someone walked in and shot him multiple times. His killer is still at large. The family believes it is someone Henry knew. For the first time, the police department is now making this a cold case. Schertz Police Chief James Jim Lowry, JRB, said this will consist of an in-depth review and said witnesses will be recalled, including the victim's son Miguel. He actually found his father murdered years ago. Miguel Gutierrez, for several years, has pleaded for answers in his father's murder. It is not fair, he said. It is not fair. He is not here. We need a trail to proceed on, the detective said, and as it stands right now, we have expired all reasonable trails that we have had as about 6 months ago. Miguel also spoke on behalf of the family. A tip may create a lead which reopens the case, he said, and reinvigorates the investigation, and that is what we desperately need. The very best gift this Christmas that our family can receive is justice for Henry. Ken's 5 also spoke with Henry's older sister who came in from New York. Minnie Gutierrez Michalski said her brother's murder takes her back to how he was that day. That has been the hardest part, she said. It wasn't so important to me who killed him. It was to me how he was feeling at the time. The investigation also involves the Texas Rangers. The chief said if they need more help with the case, they will ask for it. Miguel said with this new change, he hopes someone will come forward. He said the smallest information could be the key to catching his father's killer. It is bittersweet, he said, and a long time coming. We are hopeful. The reward for information is up to $75,000 at this point. Anyone with information can contact the Guadalupe County Crime Stoppers at 1-877-4038-477 or Schertz Police at 210-619-1200. You can remain anonymous. The mysterious case of Richardhinckley, who vanished on Christmas Day from New Zealand. When police turned up at Richardhinckley's home after a neighbor reported him missing, they found a clean and tidy unit with Japanese decor and plenty of family pictures on display. There were no signs of struggle. His laptop was still there and everything was in order except for his partially unmade bed, something that seemed slightly at odds with how tidy everything else was in the flat. It was February 10, 2016, and although the fridge was well stocked, the milk had long expired and his much-loved plants in the backyard hadn't been cared for in some time. Inquiries quickly revealed the 49-year-old was last seen on December 23rd. The last known conversation anyone had with him was when an uncle called on Christmas morning. According to his uncle, it was a shorter than normal conversation and Hinckley, who sounded a bit tense, said he'd call back when he was a bit more awake. After that, he simply vanished. Nearly 6 years on and police still have no idea what happened to the Christchurch man. Everything seems to stop at his house on the December 25, 2015. It's as if time has stood still since then, said Detective Sergeant Michael Freeman, who has been involved in the case since Hinckley went missing. It's as if someone has got out of bed, answered a phone call, made a cup of tea, left their slippers on the floor, and walked out the door. Freeman said police were contacted by Housing New Zealand, now Kainga Ora, staff on February 10th. They had received a call from a neighbor who was concerned he hadn't seen him for several weeks. Police carried out a welfare check but found no signs of a break-in or any misadventure. The flat was neat and tidy and there didn't appear to be any missing items. It appeared as if someone had just got up and walked out of the address. Police started contacting known associates, but when no one had seen Hinckley for several weeks, they launched an official missing persons inquiry, which involved trawling through all aspects of his life. A picture began to emerge of a man who loved all things Japan. He had even learned the language and decorated the walls of his flat with Japanese wallpaper. He was estranged from his father, but had a close relationship with his mother and had a good reputation with colleagues he once worked with on a fishing trawler. He had worked here and in Australia, and other jobs included time as a taxi driver and in construction. He had also managed his money well, but in 2004 he was involved in a car crash that left him with serious spinal and head injuries. In 2011 his mother died, and things changed dramatically for Hinckley. His family say the loss hit him hard. He suffered from depression and he started drinking heavily. Emotionally, he took a dive with all that grief, his Aunt Jill Martin said on the show. He also moved into a world where dabbled in drugs, had more associates than long-term friends, and ended up in financial trouble. His family still don't know if any of these factors played a role in his disappearance. Detective Inspector Michael Ford, who was not involved in the case at the time but was brought in to provide a fresh perspective on the disappearance for the show, said finding out what happened to Hinckley was difficult because there was no body. Options include the possibility that Hinckley took his own life, left of his own accord and didn't want to be found, or was killed by someone else. Hinckley had traditionally been very good with his finances, but by the time he went missing he was looking at insolvency and working with a budgeting advisor to try and repay close to $50,000 worth of debt. He had started using a credit card when his mother died, putting the cost of her funeral on the card and then making regular cash withdrawals from ATMs the following year. Police are still unsure what he did with the cash. Gambling was considered, but there was no real evidence of it. Associates described how he would flash around the money and count it in front of them. None of them seemed to know where it came from or what it was spent on. Freeman said the drug world was fickle, so could have played a role in his disappearance. Let's face it, people get killed over an ounce, a pound. If something goes wrong, that could be a possibility, but we just don't know. This is very solvable. It's just finding that piece of evidence or information that leads us down the right path, said Ford. It's just so important. If the community have information, they tell us. We want to know where he is, because if we find him, everything else will fall into place. If Richard is no longer alive, we want to bring him back and put him with our ancestors. Anyone with information is asked to call 0800 cold case or visit www.police.gov.nz/cold case.